Enter the menu from the main interface. First, click on this gear. Please enter the password interface appears. Click on the blank space. Don't click this lock. Clicking on the lock will not respond. There is no password in the factory settings. We can directly click Confirm to enter. How to set a password. It will be explained in the System Settings menu at the back. Now let's click Confirm. After entering, there are 5 main menus. 5 main menus with molecular menus. So let's start with this. Let's talk about the daily management of aquaculture management. Entry time. That's when our poultry enter the cave. Click on the dialog box. We can choose when the poultry is slaughtered. There is a feeding period and an airshot period later. During the breeding period, we choose the breeding period. The environmental controller works normally during the feeding period. Normal alarm. After the poultry is slaughtered, we choose the controller. At this point, the loop controller no longer sends out signals. The relay stops working. Alarm stopped working. There are 2 options for calculating the age of the day. One is the entry time. One is system 0 point. For example, poultry enters the cave at 12 o'clock. Then we select the entry time. It is to add 1 day of age at 12 o'clock every day. Gradually lower the target temperature from 12 o'clock every day. If we choose System 0, it is to increase the age of 1 day from 0 o'clock every day, and start gradually lowering the target temperature. Overweight and lag. This column is mainly used for intelligent ventilation, when the weight is greater or less than the standard weight. The environmental controller will automatically execute temperature and ventilation in the first or last few days, so we weigh ourselves in this week. Weight 1 day smaller than standard. We enter -1 here. If you gain weight for a day, we enter 1 here. Number of entries. Enter from here. Everyday death escape. Enter here to the next day. Then today's escape will become yesterday's escape. The environmental controller will automatically calculate the cumulative number of deaths. Displays the current survival rate in the lower left corner. There are 3 setting modes. These 3 modes correspond to the ventilation mode. So let's start with the smart mode. In smart mode, damp and heat compensation is the default state. At this time, when the actual indoor humidity above or below the target humidity, the environmental controller will set the parameters according to the underlying layer, automatically change the target temperature. The value of damp heat compensation is shown here. If the damp heat compensation period is 0 seconds, there is no delay. Instantaneously change our target temperature. You can enter the corresponding number of seconds. Let it gradually change the target temperature. For example, the humid heat compensation temperature is 0.5 degrees Celsius. We can set the compensation period to 50 seconds. So that's 0.1 degree every 10 seconds. In the parameter setting target parameters, minimum ventilation is the default state. That's the coefficient of the minimum ventilation, according to the underlying parameters of the environmental controller. Running in ventilation regulation. Daily ventilation cycle, controlled by the bottom age cycle schedule. Age and cycle time in the schedule. We are free to type. The curve time is automatically calculated by the loop controller. Minimum ventilation time. When we feel that the curve time is not right, can be adjusted by the minimum ventilation curve below. Make changes. You can pass the minus sign, plus sign to change. You can also click the dialog box to make changes. Curve adjustment minimum percentage is 50%. Maximum range. For 200%. It cannot be entered beyond this range. The compensation time is based on the difference we set, and the corresponding additional time after the difference. Compensation time, corresponding to the over-temperature compensation in ventilation compensation. There are 8 levels of over-temperature compensation below. Do not The range and append time in the 0-1 level cannot be set. This is our minimum ventilation time. 0-2-0-7 level is free to enter extremely poor. The opening temperature will be automatically displayed later. Free setting of additional time. We are at this level. How many seconds of ventilation time should be added? Back running time. Show the additional time of this level. Add the sum of the time of the previous level. The back shows the cycle stop time. The E level is the level at which the fan enters long rotation. This level no longer has append time and stop time. The running time display time is sum of curve time and compensation time. When selecting Smart Mode, all ventilation compensation interfaces are activated. Unable to choose Close. Air cooling coefficient is the default. That is, the environmental controller will automatically calculate the difference between the long revolutions of each typhoon. We need to be in the ventilation level. Check the fan you want to turn on at each level, so that the environmental controller can automatically calculate the difference between the captain's revolutions per typhoon. In breeding, we can correct the value by to change the difference between the long rotation of the fan over temperature compensation corresponds to the following 8 levels. It has been introduced just now. Humidity ventilation compensation, carbon dioxide ventilation compensation, ammonia ventilation compensation, automatic operation according to the parameters set by the environmental controller. Seasonal ventilation compensation. The environmental controller will respond to the temperature sensor outside. Automatically change the minimum ventilation time. When setting the mode for artificial, moisture and heat compensation automatically shuts down. That is, the humidity level no longer changes. Target temperature. Fan time control stage. No longer subject to ventilation regulation. Minimum ventilation curve adjustment. And age cycle schedule control. All functions of the ventilation compensation interface are turned off and cannot be opened. Minimum ventilation shutdown in target parameters. Can't turn on ventilation. Time passes by us. Ventilation level can be set freely. Where the range running time. The stop time is freely set according to your own needs. When the setting mode is semi-intelligent. There are 3 modes of moisture and heat compensation for us to choose from: default and off. Already introduced. Now let's talk about customization. Customization is controlled by the dialog box below. You can enter different temperatures here when the humidity is less than or equal to the target humidity. What is the target temperature affected by a humidity point? When the humidity is greater than or equal to the target humidity. What is the target temperature affected by a humidity point? After entering, the environmental controller automatically executes the smallest of the target parameters. There are 3 modes of ventilation to choose from. Default just explained. Now let's talk about customization. Customization is after the corresponding date. Enter the number of seconds we want to turn on. The environmental controller runs automatically according to the number of seconds we enter, according to the ventilation time growth trend we entered, increasing every day. The ventilation time can be adjusted through ventilation. Minimum ventilation curve adjustment to change. Ventilation time. The ventilation cycle is still controlled by the age cycle table. Ventilation compensation. There are 3 models of air cooling coefficient for us to choose from. Default we explained before. Now let's talk about customization. When selecting Custom, to enter parameters in the target parameter, that is, after the corresponding day age in the target parameter, enter the corresponding air cooling coefficient. In the ventilation level, enter the fan we want to turn on at each level. The environmental controller will be based on the air cooling coefficient we enter. Automatically calculate the difference between the constant rotation of each typhoon. When ventilation is not appropriate, it can be considered as amended here. when the air cooling coefficient is selected to be off. The difference between the constant rotation of each typhoon is freely set by us. Over temperature compensation can be. This activates the following 8 ventilation levels. One of the advantages of this environmental controller: humidity ventilation compensation, carbon dioxide ventilation compensation, ammonia ventilation compensation. You can choose to turn it on or off freely. Seasonal compensation we choose to close, because our minimum ventilation time is customized. This is no longer relevant to the external temperature sensor. When the target parameters minimum ventilation is closed, all ventilation compensation interfaces are closed. That is, it cannot be turned on and enabled. The ventilation time is in the ventilation level, freely set by managers. Recommend a setting mode for everyone in breeding. Settings mode: select Semi-Smart. Minimum ventilation in target parameters, select Default. In the ventilation compensation interface, in the column of air cooling coefficient, we choose the default. Over temperature compensation selection is turned on. Seasonal ventilation compensation is turned on. The above is the recommended setting method for everyone. Go back to the breeding management interface. So we're done with the 3 modes. Now start the next page. There's a page down arrow in the upper right corner. We click to go to the next page. The first display is 2 pulsed water meters. Also understandable, this loop controller supports 2 pulse water meters. Yesterday's water volume, today's water volume, and cumulative total water volume. The loop controller can be connected to a feed meter. After connecting, today's stock volume can be displayed. Yesterday's volume, cumulative volume.